Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Game Nexus. It's Dwayne here. Tonight we're coming at you with a new series, the first of a new series that I'm going to be calling the RPG Closet. For those of you who don't know me, I am an avid role-playing gamer, and I have been for about 30 odd years of my life. Obviously during the years my hobby interests have detoured into the realm of video games and tabletop miniature games. My passion has always been role-playing games. So I started off playing Dungeons and Dragons like most people did in the early 80s. As I experimented with the hobby, moved into other genres and realized that there was a huge world of role-playing games besides just sword and sorcery type games. So one of the biggest things over the years, that much to my wife's chagrin, is that I've amassed quite a large library of role-playing books. Those books have pretty much gone unused, living in my closet, collecting a lot of dust, still kept. And in my mind, one day I'll dust them all off and play them again, but we all know how realistic that is. So unlike my younger years where I could just get a bunch of buddies together, play D&D on the weekend or after work or whatever it is, these books now go unused, and they're sort of by a long forgotten time. So, one of the things I wanted to do with this segment was bring all those books out, because there's a lot of old books in there, and there's a lot of role-playing games that, are gems. Some of them are even out of print. Some of them are still in print and just on numerous revisions, but I do have a lot of role-playing games that are out of print and no longer available. So I thought I would bring them out and show them to you guys, do a little rundown on what they are, and who knows, a lot of this stuff now lives on through the power of the internet, downloadable PDFs, all that sort of thing. Communities have resurrected entire game systems. The original Star Wars role-playing game is a good example of that, and one that we'll cover on a future episode. So tonight we are going to be talking about probably one of my favorite role-playing games as a younger person growing up. It's the one that I believe I played the most outside of Dungeons and Dragons, and that is Robotech, the role-playing game. So that's this guy right here, and this has lived in my closet for many, many years, alongside numerous source books that were published back in the 80s for that game and the years after it came out. So I'll give you a little history on this game. Robotech the RPG, I believe it was probably Palladium's third book. It's published by Palladium Books. It's about the third game. I remember in high school seeing Ninja Turtles and other strangeness, and yes, another game that we'll probably be covering because I do have that one as well, and heard mention of a fantasy role-playing game called the Palladium role-playing game. Robotech hit my attention really quick because I was a big fan of the cartoon, which was airing live episodes, or current episodes, sorry, of that series when I was in high school. So to see the role-playing game come out was just crazy. Now, a little tidbit on that, my friends and I actually, before we even knew the role-playing game existed, we were so excited about Robotech, and we're Dungeons & Dragons players, we made a homebrew Robotech, the role-playing game system for us to play. It was very bad. It was more just to capture that feeling of watching a cartoon, and we knew that, role-playing games existed because of Dungeons & Dragons. So, as soon as the game came out, we jumped on board. So I won't go into a long history on Robotech as a franchise. That's an entirely different video we could get into on that one, about how it was created and the troubles and ups and downs of that franchise. We'll focus on the role-playing game. So the role-playing game basically came out as a very small standalone book. One of the cool things about it is it used a revision of Palladium's rule system to accommodate for mechanized vehicles, mecha, giant space aliens with blasters. Up until that point, Palladium had only been really catering to fantasy-based combat and settings. And of course, when Ninja Turtles came along, they kind of upgraded that into the martial arts, mutants and such like that. So it didn't really shift into full-blown lasers and missiles and, on the scale that Robotech did. So one of the things that the Robotech RPG did really well is create a system that allowed non-mechanized personnel, army, militia, exist alongside these giant 40-foot tall transformable space fighters and aliens, of course, as well. So it did a great job of capturing the television show and sort of cramming it into Palladium's established rules without coming up with an entirely new set of rules that, future Palladium games would have to jettison in favor of, a new setting. So throughout all of Palladium's books, they've maintained this single set of rules, and they've just adapted it for different settings, which is really cool. It's kind of the original Fate Core role-playing system, you know, like GURPS and such. So very cool in that respect. So one of the first things that really jumped out at me with this book was the artwork. I mean, most of Palladium's games in the 80s just had spectacular artwork. And right off the bat, I mean, it was an artwork that was pulled from the cartoon. It was a non-color book at the time. Palladium didn't have color page printing in their books. It was all black and white. So none of that artwork was really pulled from I mean, there was minor bits pulled from the show here and there, but for the most part, this was all drawn and new assets. So for us to see some of these Veritechs and vehicles and people and creatures, you know, right in front of us on a printed page versus having to pause our VCR to watch it was pretty cool. The artist who pretty much spearheaded the Robotech RPG was Kevin Long. And he followed Palladium throughout many years of its history, developing books, I think culminating with the Rifts role-playing game line. And so that was pretty much the main draw for me, to be able to see that artwork really spark my imagination. You know, it got me thinking of new adventures and new characters and settings and, you know, basically everything the cartoon was, and then just basically taking it in a whole new direction. So that was pretty exciting. One of the other cool things is that the role-playing game book did is that it really pulled back the layers on all the different elements of the cartoon series that maybe we didn't see, that they didn't focus on in the cartoon necessarily. So whether that be the Veritechs themselves, details on like how many missiles it carried, details on how the engines run, just everything that you would want to know as a geek or a fanboy of Robotech was in this small book. You know, mechanized troops such as the Destroids, you know, the things that were only shown briefly in the cartoon if you watched it. The role-playing game really went into detail and allowed you to actually create a character that you could actually pilot one of those things, which, you know, in the cartoon series, you never really got to see any of these pilots. You just focused on the Veritech fighters. So that, again, was pretty cool. As far as character building, you know, a lot of attention gets put on role-playing games and the character building process. And I think Palladium had a really good system that worked well. You know, they had a very clean system as far as your attributes go, skills. I mean, it definitely required that you bust out the calculator and start totaling up your modifiers based on how many skills you get and your attribute modifiers and things like that. Compounded even more so when you got into your mechanized vehicles, and then there's even more bonuses that got, you know, layered on top of your character for that. The biggest problem that I have, and this is the same problem that I have with all of Palladium's line, in fact, I think, is that they have a really robust skill system. And, you know, kudos to them for developing that. I mean, we've got things like cooking, sewing, you know, like just a ton of different skills that you can pick for your characters. But what I found is that unless you are a really good dungeon master, unless you were somebody who really took the time to make sure that characters utilized all aspects of their character, you ended up with a character who had a bunch of useless skills that he's never going to use. Again, the aforementioned cooking, sewing, things like that, and mostly combat skills that really, it kind of encouraged a meta kind of mindset, you know, looking at the skill list. You know, my players would often, and myself would often look and go, okay, what's going to give me the most bonuses for things that I'm going to do more in this game? So that would be things like hitting, dodging, damage, you know, the amount of attacks you get. So, you know, again, they created a very cool skill system, but I don't think they really encouraged dungeon masters to incorporate all of those skills. It wasn't until Rifts came out, I would guess that Rifts was the one that you would really want to make use of things like survival and swimming, you know, because being a sort of a post-apocalyptic setting, you know, they would encourage more broader use of skills. Robotech was a military game. You know, you hopped in your Veritech, you took off, you fought space aliens. Really, you didn't sit around telling adventures about pilots sitting around in a forest, you know, sewing. If I had to say there was some flaws in the role-playing game itself, it would have been probably, you know, the fact that the book was very thin. It didn't have a lot of meat to it. That could have been premeditated on Palladium's part, knowing that they would create source books down the road to address some of the stuff that maybe we wanted to see in the core book. So compared to Palladium's other future releases, the role-playing, the Robotech game was very thin, very small DM section, not a lot of material on how to run your own adventures or ideas for your own adventures. One of the other big things that threw me off is that it didn't have anything to really address parties of characters, much like in a fantasy game where you'd have elves, dwarf, rogues, fighters. In Robotech, it was very weird to have a party consisting of a couple of Veritech fighter pilots, some Destroids, and then they had a lot of character classes that didn't even come with mecha. So in the cartoon series, all the heroes had mecha. They had ways of fighting against the Zentradi and the alien invaders. In the role-playing game, if you wanted to be a military specialist or communications engineer and your buddy wanted to be a Veritech or Destroid pilot, it made for a very weird group, and the DM really had to get clever on how he could sort of take these people and make them a part of the same party. So there wasn't really anything to address that. So in most cases, when we played the game, everybody just played Veritech pilots, or they played a Destroid and a Veritech or something like that. Combat was the focus for the most part. As an older gamer looking back now, I look at some of the other character classes and go, wow, there's lots of meaty material in here to tell different stories from a different point of view. But again, that whole dichotomy between somebody who's in a Veritech and somebody who's on the ground with a pistol, how do you create adventures for that? So that was kind of one of a rough spot for it. These are just minor things, in what was just an amazing role-playing game for its time. There was really nothing else on the market at that time that really compared to it. So I think the inevitable question that's going to come up is, can you still buy this game? The reality is that, this game is very old, and, if you are interested in Robotech, and there's a crazy amount of people that are still interested in this franchise, if you're a Robotech fan and you're a fan of role-playing games, you don't have a lot of options, and the franchise hasn't really been pushed to the front line of Palladium's, agenda. So what's been happening with Robotech? Well, in the years since the original books have sort of gone out of print, I do believe that Drive-Thru RPG currently offers the PDFs of them for sale. But what Palladium did, probably about 10 years ago, I think now, or less, they actually revisited the Robotech RPG line, and they actually re-released them in manga form. So you can actually buy these books in the traditional softcover, small-size manga form, black and white again. But they've gone through and re-released the line. Now, what they've done with that since is they haven't really touched the rules. I mean, Palladium's rules have stayed the same throughout all the years and all their products. What they've done is they've revisited the lore. So by that I mean, in the years since the cartoons come out, the cartoon really was a hodgepodge of pre-existing animes that were aired in Japan, and Carl Macek took that and sort of repurposed it into the Robotech saga. And in the years following those cartoons, there's been other attempts at new movies and TV shows, the Shadow Chronicles, and I think the Robotech universe has kind of been sort of in flux. So what Palladium's done is trying to take from these different source materials and sort of refine and rechisel their RPG. So one of the key things I noticed in the new RPG is that they've renamed the RDF. In the 80s it was the Robotech Defense Force. Well, now they've got the UDEF. And they've just kind of smoothed around and repurposed some of the terminology. One of the biggest things in the new books that I was really sad to see is that the artwork has been changed. Kevin Long had a falling out with Palladium, or so the rumor goes, and all of his original artwork has either been redrawn, some of it's been reused. If you look at the books, they definitely own the artwork that Kevin did for Palladium, but for the most part we have other artists trying to emulate Kevin Long's style, and to a keen eye it's noticeable, but your average person picking the book up isn't really going to notice that. If you're a big fan of Kevin Long's work like I am, it became immediate. Other than that, though, they basically carbon copied the books, added some new fluff, refined the timelines, and recovered it and sent it back out in the world, and it's a great product. I actually own that as well, but the original still sticks out with me and just inspires me a little bit more when I look at it. I believe you can pick up all the new line. I think you can get all 3 eras. You get Southern Cross, Macross, and you even get Invid Invasion. I don't believe they went and republished a Sentinels book, and I'm not too sure if the Sentinels line, as far as the Robotech IP goes, really does currently exist in the form it did when that role-playing book came out and the novels came out. So if you are interested in playing Robotech, hunt down the old PDFs via Drive-Thru RPG, or hopefully a friend still has a hard copy, like I do. I kept mine. But otherwise, pick up the PDFs, dive in. It doesn't matter that this game isn't being played by hundreds of people in your local area. Get a copy, build a campaign up, and just introduce them to the world of Robotech. It still lives today, and it still has the appeal. So it's just a matter of what you do with it. So again, I would just want to say thanks for tuning into this sort of retrospective on the Robotech RPG. If you are really wanting to give this game a shot, the Game Nexus does have a Google Plus community that I've created a while ago. I fully have an intent to at some point play my Robotech RPG again. I toyed with doing an online session. I do actually want to get some people in a room and play this game. It's going to be tricky because, again, I'm going to have to educate them on the franchise, but I think that's part of the fun of it. But if you are wanting to get involved and have some talks about it, hit up the Google Plus community page. I'll link that in the description below. And if you have any questions as well, just about Robotech, I don't consider myself the ultimate expert, but I've got a lot of years under my belt with the franchise and a lot of ideas, a lot of cool things that I am definitely wanting to try with my campaign when I do eventually get around to launching it. So make sure you leave those comments below. Feel free to share the video as well if you know of people who love Robotech and want some insight on the rules, or if you're curious about it yourself. So definitely share it, and also subscribe, because we're going to keep these coming back to you, especially with different games. And I do have lots of role-playing games in my closet, so we got quite a few episodes to go if I want to cover all of them. So thanks for tuning in again, guys, and make sure you hit up www.enterthegamenexus.com. That's our website, and of course our YouTube channel that you're watching now. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.